In this video, I'm going to show you how I layered the fur on the back of the Heartflame Diki Spirit's neck, and then I quilted the front with sequins. I start with a 4-way stretch fabric. I cut out a strip of the fur I want for the bottom of the neck, where it's going to meet the back, and then I sew it onto the 4-way stretch fabric. I chose a blue because I want it to gradually shift from a purpley light lavender color to a deeper blue, bluish purple really. And then I start taking strips of different colors and layering them up. I'm starting with more purples and deeper blues. I put fur with white on the tips to blend them a little bit more. You can see here the fur I use has a gradient from pink to blue, and I just use pieces of this fur. If I want it a little more blue or if I want it a little more pink, I can cut it out at different parts of the fur. I'm using a zigzag stitch from my sewing machine, and I'm sewing just directly on top of the fur. I don't even bother pinning it because it's so thin, it doesn't really matter if it's a little off. You can see I'm starting to alternate the fur with a different color in the middle as it is on the sides because I want the color to shift a little bit as you go to the edges of the neck. This is a really great way to use scraps that you don't really have any other use for. So I always save my bright colored scraps for layering like this. You can see how that blue with the white tips really blends everything together. When I get closer to the top, I want to add some ostrich feather. I pull the feathers this way and that if they're a little bit too long or short, and then I glue them down onto the stitches. I put fur over that, and then I sew that down with the zigzag stitch. I cut off the ends and they'll stay in place because they're glued now. And I'm adding a little bit more lighter blue as I reach the top, more feathers. Finally, I get to my iridescent fabric. It's a woven fabric, so when I sew it on, I can actually brush out the horizontal strands until it's just like iridescent little pieces of hair. I wanted to use this layering method, especially with this Diki Spirit, because I don't have the particular color of purple that I wanted it to be. So mixing some blues and pinks together actually got the perfect purple that I wanted without me having to buy a ton of different furs for it. I can use the fur colors I have as long as I have your main base colors and use them as a sort of paint to mix together into the color I want. Once it's long enough, I'll turn it over and inspect all my layers. You can see how lovely all these colors blended together, and the color only shows up in strips if you dig in deep enough to look at all the different colors at the base. Now I have to cut it into shape, so I place the Diki Spirit on top to measure all my lines properly, and then I draw out the lines to make it a sort of hooded cobra shape. It's kind of like a fish, a keyhole fish shape in the end. You can see all the layers whenever I cut each piece off. It's really satisfying. I'm doing like a little V at the top here, and then a little bit of like an oval or almond shape in the middle. And those are going to be sewn together so it has an arching hooded shape. I press the fur together, and then I start sewing it up with a blanket stitch. I make sure that whenever I put my needle through the furs, it's going through every single layer, so there's no loose layers in there. So I'm very meticulous at this point, and it's very hard to get through all the layers with just the needle. You have to push really hard. Then I sew up the almond shape. Here it is, speeded up. You can see how small those stitches are though. And yeah, this is the shape. You can kind of get that Diki Spirit, like puffy at the top of the neck look now. And there's all the layers. Now it's time to start on the front of the neck. I take a yellow fur and cut out the shape I want for the very center of the neck, and I'm going to work my way out. Then I take the gold sequin fabric that I want, and I cut it into shape to fit into the center of the yellow piece. When I sew it to the yellow piece, I start in the middle and work my way up so it stays even, since I'm not pinning it. I use a blanket stitch as well, and then I work on the next side in the same way. This is the result. It's hard to see with the long fur, but... And then I take this really velvety rust-colored fur, and I sew strips down the side of the yellow. This is also with the blanket stitch. Very small, meticulous stitching, so everything stays put. That's one side, and here's the other one. Then I take some bright orange strips and I sew them to the rust color I just sewed on. Same method. These are just cut a little bit more tailored to the shape of the neck I want. If you look closely, instead of pointing down, I actually made the orange fur face outward because I wanted to fluff out like that. Here's the result. I actually ended up cutting it a little thinner because it was really thick. And then I added some hot pink outside of the orange. You might think I'm done, but no, I decided to add red outside of the pink. The red was made with scraps, so I had to kind of piece it together, but this is the end result. I know it looks a little messy now, but I'll be trimming the fur later. Now I can add my two pieces together. I start at the top and I blanket stitch my way down, much the same as all the other pieces I've been sewing together. It's just a little bit more tedious because it's thicker, and I want to make sure that they're lined up properly. This is kind of the idea. It's really blending together well. I was calling this my Lisa Frank Diki spirit because of the colors. They were so vivid and bright. And then I sew up the other side until I have a little tube. Sometimes this is too thick to be able to turn inside out, but this one was fine. Then I turn it inside out and I have my Diki spirit neck ready. I place it on the armature and I put the head of the Diki spirit on top of that. You can really see the Lisa Frank motif coming out here. I went ahead and trimmed the yellow down a little bit with my thinning shears. That looks a little bit neater already, but I will be trimming more later. So this is such a thick piece of fabric that I want to drill holes in the head to sew through. I drill holes on every side of the head and then I feed a long needle through it, and this will just ensure that the fur does not slip off if the glue doesn't hold. And I just kind of go back and forth through the fur to make sure it's adhered strongly to the neck. And here I'm actually stuffing underneath the sequin part of the neck. They always get a little hidden if there's not enough stuffing behind them. And then the neck is so stiff that I like it to be connected to the spine inside. I want to do this before I get any glue on. So I take my curved mattress needle and I feed it through one side. I try to put the thread around the same area and then go around the armature and back through to the other side. So this is just feeding a thread all the way around the armature, so whenever I move the neck, the fur actually will move with the bones a little bit smoother and it will adhere to the shape. Once that's done, I finish up sewing the neck to the head and I stuff some places that feel a little bit lacking. And you can see the stuffing is pushing the sequins out a little bit more. They were kind of getting lost before that. And notice how the fur lays really nicely along the neck. If I didn't do those stitches, it would feel kind of like a sock on top of the armature instead of really flowing with the anatomy of the body. Then I use my Fabrifix to glue the fur down along the edges of the head. I take this like velvety thin fabric and I cut a circle with a hole in the middle and I glue it over the ear socket. This is gonna give the ears a little bit more friction later, and it's also gonna keep the paint from rubbing off. Then I cut fur off the backing and I glue it to where the fur meets the head. I add ostrich feathers here as well. I put a little glue down and I place the feathers where I want them. And I cut some of the excess ends off once that's adhered, and I glue more fur on top of that. This layering is very much the same concept as layering on the neck. I'm just gluing instead of sewing. So I want the colors to be kind of purpley, so I mix some pink in there. And I'm just continuing this process all the way up to the face. You can tell I don't actually have that same purpley color on the face, but with the layering it really blends in really nice. Here's some lavender fur. And I add some on the sides, and you can see it's really coming together and starting to blend into the face more. This is a little bit of a gray blue to blend some of the vivid colors and make them look more subdued. I'm adding some pink on the sides, and I add some of this dark raspberry color to the bands that run along the eyes and blend the blue and the purple. Then I put a layer of that long yellow over the sequins, and I blend it into the red with some orange. I put a little bit more along the bottom of the neck so it blends in like a chin. And I layer up all my colors to blend in, add a little purple where the red meets the blue, using some color theory here. I'm just adding little bits of color until it blends really smoothly. I'm really liking this. It's looking a little less Lisa Frank. And then I add that lavender color in front of the ears. When I press it down, I make sure to pull it forward so it doesn't get stuck in the ear socket. I do that on the other side as well. Then I add some of that dusty blue on top and a little bit of purple for the crease in the middle of the head. Once that's all dry, I can brush it out and start trimming. I make sure to trim with the grain of the fur so there's no blunt edges. And I just get some of these longer ones closer to the face so it looks a little bit more natural, like it's got longer fur as it goes down to the base of the face. I add the ears just to make sure it looks good all together, and I love it. And then I stuff the neck with stuffing, making sure to get in all those little intricate parts. You can see that little cobra-esque shape coming out really well. Now I want to clean up the front of the fur with some trimming. I'm doing it very slowly because I want to make sure I don't over trim, but you can see here now the colors blend really well down into a point, and I like that you can see the pink and the red coming through really well. I'm going to still blend those edges with some paint later, but I really love the way this came out. I ended up trimming some of the blue behind the red, and you can see that in the finished product. But I'm really happy with the color. I did not expect it to come out as good as it did. And I decided to keep the sequins hidden under this strip of fur because I thought it was a fun little detail where you can just raise its chin and then you'll see the sequins. Diki Spirits and Voids probably have the most complicated fur work than all my room guardians. So if you're ever wondering why they're so expensive, this is why. I really relish in the details on these, and this was probably my most complex Diki Spirit yet. Here you can see the finished product next to the color sketch. I'm still so surprised I got it to look so close.